The crowd roared as Marcus Johnson crossed the finish line, breaking the world record in the 400-meter sprint, gold medal around his neck. Tears streaming down his face, he looked directly into the camera and said something that would haunt millions of viewers. "This one's for everyone who believed in me when my own mother couldn't." What he didn't know was that at that exact moment, 3,000 miles away, his mother Sarah was sobbing uncontrollably in her living room, watching her son achieve greatness, while carrying the weight of words she could never take back. How does a mother go from being ashamed of her own son to witnessing him become Olympic royalty? How does a young black boy abandoned by the woman who gave him life rise from the ashes of rejection to touch the sky? This is the story of Marcus Johnson, a story that will challenge everything you think you know about family, identity, and the power of the human spirit to overcome the deepest wounds imaginable. What you're about to hear isn't just about sports or success. It's about the brutal truth of how racism can poison even the most sacred bonds, and how one young man's refusal to be defined by hatred transformed not just his own life, but the heart of the woman who tried to cast him aside. Thank you for choosing to spend your time with this story. If this touches your heart the way it touched mine, please subscribe to our channel and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support means everything, and I can't wait to share more powerful stories with you. Marcus Johnson wasn't supposed to exist. That's what his mother Sarah told herself every day for the first 5 years of his life. Born in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, in 1995, Marcus was the product of what Sarah called the biggest mistake of my life. A brief relationship with James, a black construction worker who left town before he even knew Sarah was pregnant. Sarah Johnson came from what she considered good stock. Fifth-generation Iowa farmers, church-going people who believed in hard work and traditional values. When she found out she was pregnant at 19, unmarried and alone, her world crumbled. But it wasn't just the pregnancy that terrified her, it was the color of the child she would carry. Growing up in a predominantly white community, Sarah had absorbed the subtle and not-so-subtle messages about race that permeated her environment. Her father, Robert, had made his feelings clear about mixing races throughout her childhood, often using language that would make most people cringe today. Her mother, Linda, was gentler but equally set in her ways, believing that people should stick with their own kind. When Marcus was born, the delivery room fell silent. The nurses exchanged glances. Sarah's mother gripped the armrest of her chair so tightly her knuckles went white, and Sarah, exhausted from 18 hours of labor, looked at her son's beautiful brown skin and felt something she would spend years trying to forget: a deep, shameful disappointment. Marcus's early years were marked by this tension. Sarah loved him. There was no question about that. She fed him, clothed him, read him bedtime stories, but there was always an undercurrent of something else. A distance, a hesitation, a wish that things could be different. When they walked through grocery stores, Sarah noticed the stares. When they attended family gatherings, she saw how her relatives interacted with Marcus differently than with her white nephews and nieces. The breaking point came when Marcus was 5 years old. Sarah had started dating again, a white man named David, who worked at the local bank. David was everything her family wanted for her: stable, local, and most importantly, white. But David made his feelings about Marcus clear from the beginning. "I'm not ready to be a father to someone else's kid," he would say, the word "someone" carrying a weight that didn't need to be spelled out. The day that changed everything started like any other Tuesday morning. In October 2000, Marcus, now 5 years old, was getting ready for kindergarten when Sarah received a phone call that would fracture their family forever. David was on the other line, his voice carrying an ultimatum that Sarah had been dreading but somehow expecting. "Sarah, I've been thinking about us, about our future," David's voice crackled through the old kitchen phone. "I love you, I really do, but I can't build a life with you if Marcus is going to be part of it. I'm not cut out to raise a black kid, people are going to talk, and frankly, I don't think it's fair to any of us." Sarah stood in her kitchen, watching Marcus carefully tie his shoes, a skill he had just mastered and was incredibly proud of. He looked up at her with those bright, trusting eyes and smiled. "Mommy, look, I did it all by myself." But Sarah wasn't really seeing him. Her mind was racing through the implications of David's words. This was her chance at the normal life she had always wanted. David represented security, acceptance from her family, a way back into the community she felt she had been exiled from the moment Marcus was born. "I need some time to think," she whispered into the phone. her eyes still on Marcus as he gathered his backpack for school. That night, after Marcus had gone to bed, Sarah called her mother. Linda's response was swift and decisive. "Honey, you know I love that boy, but you have to think about your future. You're still young. You could have a whole new life with David, maybe even more children. Real children who look like you." The word real hit Sarah like a physical blow. But instead of defending Marcus, instead of hanging up on her mother, she found herself nodding along. "I know, Mom, I know." Over the next several weeks, Sarah began pulling away from Marcus emotionally. She stopped reading him bedtime stories, claiming she was too tired. She enrolled him in after-school care so she could spend more time with David. When Marcus asked why Mommy seemed sad all the time, she would just ruffle his hair and tell him everything was fine. But everything wasn't fine. Sarah was planning something that would haunt her for the rest of her life. The decision came on a rainy Thursday in November. Sarah had been dating David for 8 months, and he had started talking about marriage, about buying a house together, about starting fresh. But his condition remained the same. Marcus couldn't be part of that future. Sarah called her sister Patricia, who lived in Chicago. Patricia had always been more liberal than the rest of the family, more accepting of differences. She was also unable to have children of her own. "Patricia," Sarah said, her voice shaking, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to not judge me." "What is it, Sarah?" "Would you consider taking Marcus for a while, just until I get my life sorted out?" The silence on the other end of the line stretched for what felt like hours. "Sarah, are you asking me to adopt your son?" "I'm asking you to give him the life I can't give him. I'm asking you to love him the way he deserves to be loved." Patricia Johnson Williams was nothing like her sister Sarah. Where Sarah saw obstacles, Patricia saw possibilities. Where Sarah felt shame, Patricia felt pride. When 5-year-old Marcus arrived at her Chicago apartment in December 2000, carrying a single suitcase and a confused expression, Patricia made him a promise that would change both their lives. "You are wanted here, you are loved here, and you are going to do incredible things." The transition wasn't easy for Marcus. He didn't understand why Mommy had stopped calling, why Aunt Patricia was now tucking him in at night, why everything familiar had been stripped away. He would cry himself to sleep, asking for his mother, and Patricia would sit beside his bed, stroking his hair and promising him that everything would be okay. But Patricia knew she needed help. She enrolled Marcus in therapy with Dr. Angela Freeman, a Black child psychologist who specialized in adoption and abandonment issues. Dr. Freeman was the first person to really see Marcus, to understand the complexity of his situation. This child has been rejected not just by his mother, but by his entire racial identity, Dr. Freeman explained to Patricia after their first session. Sarah's family made him feel like being Black was something to be ashamed of. "We need to rebuild his sense of self from the ground up." Patricia threw herself into this mission with the fervor of someone making up for lost time. She enrolled Marcus in a more diverse school in her neighborhood. She filled their apartment with books about Black history and achievement. She took him to museums, cultural events, and community gatherings where he could see successful Black families, Black professionals, Black excellence in all its forms. But most importantly, Patricia never spoke ill of Sarah. When Marcus asked why his mother had left him, Patricia would say, "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes when they're scared. Your mother loves you, but she wasn't ready to be the mother you needed. That doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you." As Marcus grew older, his natural athleticism became apparent. He was fast, incredibly fast. By the time he was in 3rd grade, he was outrunning kids 2 years older than him. Patricia enrolled him in a youth track program, and his coach, a former Olympian named Robert "Big Rob" Thompson, immediately saw Marcus's potential. "That boy's got something special," Big Rob told Patricia after Marcus's first practice. "But more than speed, he's got heart. He runs like he's trying to prove something to the world." And Marcus was trying to prove something. Every race he ran, every medal he won, every record he broke, was a message sent across the miles to a mother who had chosen to look away. He was proving that her shame was misplaced, that her choice was wrong, that he was worthy of love and pride. Meanwhile, back in Cedar Rapids, Sarah was living the life she thought she wanted. She had married David in a small ceremony in 2003. They had bought a house in a nice neighborhood. They were trying to have children of their own, but the children never came, and the perfect life Sarah had sacrificed Marcus for began to feel hollow and empty. Sarah would sometimes catch herself looking at Black children in public, wondering if Marcus was that tall now, if he smiled like that, if he still tied his shoes with the same concentration and pride. But these moments of longing were quickly pushed down, buried under layers of justification and denial. In 2008, when Marcus was 13, Patricia made a decision that would set the stage for everything that followed. She legally adopted Marcus, giving him her last name and making their bond official. But she also did something else. She started a scrapbook documenting every one of Marcus's achievements, every race he won, every newspaper article that mentioned his name, and she sent copies of everything to Sarah. Sarah never responded to these packages. She would receive them, look through them briefly, and then hide them in a box in her closet. But she kept them, every single one. By 2012, Marcus Johnson Williams was no longer just a promising young athlete. He was a phenomenon. At 17, he held state records in both the 2,000 and 400-meter sprints. College recruiters were calling Patricia's house daily. Sports Illustrated had done a feature on him titled "The Next Great American Sprinter." But with success came questions about his background, questions that Patricia knew would eventually lead back to Sarah. The first major confrontation came during Marcus's senior year of high school. A local Chicago reporter, doing a human interest story about Marcus, asked about his family background. Marcus, who had always been honest about his adoption, mentioned that his biological mother lived in Iowa, but that they didn't have contact. The reporter, sensing a deeper story, did some digging and found Sarah. When Sarah's phone rang that Tuesday evening in March 2013, she wasn't prepared for what she heard.
Mrs. Johnson, this is Rick Martinez from the Chicago Tribune. I'm doing a story about Marcus Johnson Williams, and I understand you're his biological mother. Would you like to comment on his incredible athletic achievements?
Sarah's world stopped. For 13 years, she had successfully compartmentalized her life, keeping her past with Marcus separate from her present with David. Now those worlds were about to collide in the most public way possible. "I'm sorry, you must have the wrong person," Sarah managed to say before hanging up. But it was too late. The reporter had already confirmed the connection through public records. Within days, the story was published. Olympic hopeful's estranged mother refuses comment on son's success. David read the article over breakfast while Sarah sat across from him, her coffee growing cold in her hands. "Sarah," David's voice was controlled but angry. "Is there something you want to tell me?" The conversation that followed was brutal. David felt betrayed, lied to, manipulated. "You told me he was being raised by your sister temporarily. You never said you had given up your parental rights. You never said you had completely abandoned him." "It wasn't abandonment," Sarah protested, but even as she said it, she knew how hollow it sounded. "Then what was it? What do you call a mother who gives away her child and then pretends he doesn't exist for 13 years? Sarah couldn't answer because she didn't have an answer that didn't make her sound like a monster. Meanwhile, in Chicago, Marcus was dealing with his own crisis. The newspaper article had stirred up emotions he thought he had processed in therapy. Patricia found him in his room that night, staring at a printed copy of the article. "She wouldn't even say my name," Marcus said quietly. "After all these years, after everything I've accomplished, she still can't acknowledge that I exist." Patricia sat down beside him on the bed. "Maybe it's time we reached out to her directly. Maybe it's time for you to have the conversation you've been avoiding." But Marcus shook his head. "No. If she wanted to be in my life, she would be. I'm done trying to prove myself to someone who doesn't want to see." This was Marcus's darkest period. Despite his athletic success, despite the love and support of Patricia and his track family, the rejection by his biological mother cut deeper than he had ever admitted. His time started slipping. He began skipping practice. His college coaches were concerned. Dr. Freeman, who Marcus still saw periodically, helped him understand what was happening. "You've been running from this pain for years, Marcus, literally running. But you can't outrun the need for your mother's love, and you can't achieve enough success to make up for that fundamental rejection." The lowest point came in May 2013, just weeks before Marcus was supposed to graduate and head to Stanford University on a full athletic scholarship. During a particularly difficult practice, he collapsed on the track, not from physical exhaustion, but from emotional overwhelm. As he lay on the warm rubber surface of the track, staring up at the sky, Marcus made a decision that would define the next phase of his life. He wasn't going to run from his pain anymore. He was going to run toward his dreams with a clarity and purpose that would make his mother's rejection irrelevant. But first, he had one more thing to do. He asked Patricia to help him write a letter to Sarah. Not asking for reconciliation, not begging for love, but simply letting her know who he had become and who he intended to be. The letter was 3 pages long. It detailed his athletic achievements, his academic success, his plans for the future, but it also contained something else: forgiveness. "I don't understand why you made the choices you did," Marcus wrote, "but I want you to know that I'm okay. More than okay. I'm going to make something of myself that will make you proud, whether you want to be or not. And if you ever want to be part of my life, the door is open. But if you don't, that's okay too. I've learned to find my worth in places other than your approval." Sarah received the letter on a Wednesday afternoon in June 2013. She read it sitting in her car in the grocery store parking lot, tears streaming down her face. When she got home, David was waiting for her. "We need to talk," he said. The conversation between Sarah and David that June afternoon in 2013 would end their marriage and force Sarah to confront truths she had been avoiding for 18 years. David, who had been doing his own soul-searching since the newspaper article, had reached a conclusion that surprised even him. "I've been thinking about what kind of man I was when I gave you that ultimatum about Marcus," David began, his voice heavy with regret. "I've been thinking about what kind of man I've been for the past 13 years, letting you live with this pain while I pretended it didn't exist." Sarah looked up from Marcus's letter, which she had read 7 times since arriving home. "The truth is, Sarah, I was scared. Scared of what people would think. Scared of being different. Scared of loving a child who didn't look like me. But you know what I'm more scared of now? I'm scared of being the kind of person who destroys families because of fear." David sat down across from Sarah at their kitchen table, the same table where they had shared thousands of meals while pretending that Marcus didn't exist. "I want you to call him," David said quietly. "I want you to call your son." Sarah shook her head. "It's too late. It's been too late for years. It's only too late if you decide it's too late." But Sarah's resistance went deeper than fear of rejection. Over the years, she had built an elaborate internal narrative to justify her action. She had convinced herself that Marcus was better off without her, that Patricia could give him things she couldn't, that her love would somehow taint him or hold him back. The real truth, the one she had never spoken aloud to anyone, was that she had been ashamed not just of Marcus, but of herself. Ashamed of her own capacity for love, ashamed of her own weakness in the face of family pressure, ashamed of her own racism that she had never fully acknowledged or addressed. "I gave him away because I was ashamed of what people would think," Sarah finally admitted, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I was ashamed of having a black son. I was ashamed of loving someone I thought I wasn't supposed to love. And then I was ashamed of giving him away. And then I was ashamed of staying away. And now I'm ashamed of all of it." David reached across the table and took her hand. "Shame is just another kind of prison, Sarah, and you've been locked up for 18 years. That night, Sarah did something she hadn't done since Marcus was 5 years old. She prayed for him. Not the distant, general kind of prayer she had offered over the years, but a specific, heartfelt plea for his happiness, his success, his peace. And for the first time in 18 years, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of her love for him. But feeling love and acting on it are 2 different things. Sarah's breakthrough with David didn't immediately translate into reaching out to Marcus. Instead, she began what she would later describe as her education period. She started reading about racism, about colorism, about the experiences of biracial children in America. She volunteered at a local community center that served predominantly black families. She began therapy with a counselor who specialized in racial identity issues. For 2 years, Sarah worked on herself, while Marcus worked toward his Olympic dreams. She followed his career obsessively, reading every article, watching every race video she could find online. She learned that he had graduated from Stanford with a degree in sociology, that he was training for the 2016 Olympics, that he had started a foundation to help at-risk youth in Chicago. She also learned something else, that in every interview, when asked about his family, Marcus spoke lovingly about Patricia and respectfully about his biological mother. He never expressed anger or bitterness. He simply said that everyone makes choices, and he had chosen to focus on the love he had, rather than the love he lacked. This grace, this maturity, this capacity for forgiveness in her son broke something open in Sarah that had been sealed shut for decades. In 2015, as Marcus was preparing for the Olympic trials, Sarah made a decision that terrified her. She bought a plane ticket to Chicago. She wasn't going to ambush Marcus or force a confrontation. She was going to watch him race from the stands anonymously. She just wanted to see him, to be in the same space as him, to witness firsthand the man her little boy had become. But as Sarah sat in O'Hare Airport, waiting for her connecting flight, something happened that would change everything. The departure board showed that Marcus's race was being broadcast live on the airport TVs. Sarah found herself standing with dozens of other travelers, watching her son warm up for the most important race of his life. The camera panned the crowd, and for a split second, Sarah saw Patricia in the stands, holding a sign that read, "That's my son," with a picture of 5-year-old Marcus next to a current photo. The juxtaposition of past and present, of the child she had given away and the man he had become, was overwhelming. Sarah missed her flight. She sat in the airport for 3 hours, crying and calling David, who had driven her to the airport. "I can't do this," she sobbed into the phone. "I can't just show up in his life after all these years. What right do I have?" "You have the right of every mother who loves her child," David said gently. "But maybe you're not ready yet. And that's okay too." Sarah flew home that day without seeing Marcus race. But something had shifted. The wall she had built around her heart was beginning to crack. The 2016 Olympics in Rio de Janeiro represented everything Marcus had worked toward his entire life. At 21, he was the youngest member of the U.S. track and field team, the favorite to win gold in the 400-meter sprint, and the subject of countless human interest stories about overcoming adversity. But Marcus wasn't thinking about any of that as he prepared for the biggest race of his life. He was thinking about a conversation he had had with Patricia the night before. "I got a strange phone call today," Patricia had told him as they sat in his hotel room, overlooking the Olympic Village. "From your mother." Marcus's head snapped up. In all the years of therapy, all the conversations about forgiveness and moving forward, he had never stopped hoping that someday Sarah would reach out. "She didn't ask to talk to you," Patricia continued quickly, seeing the hope and fear warring in Marcus's eyes. "She just wanted me to know that she would be watching tomorrow. She wanted me to tell you that she's proud of you and that she's sorry." Marcus was quiet for a long time. "What did you tell her?" "I told her that sorry is a start, but it's not enough. I told her that if she really wants to be part of your life, she needs to do the work. Real work, not just word." That night, Marcus barely slept. He thought about the 5-year-old boy who had cried for his mother, about the teenager who had run faster and faster trying to earn love that seemed always out of reach, about the man he had become despite and because of that abandonment. Meanwhile, in Cedar Rapids, Sarah was having her own sleepless night. She had called Patricia in a moment of impulse, watching Marcus's pre-race interviews on television. When the reporter asked Marcus about his motivation, he had said something that pierced her heart. "I run for everyone who believes in the power of love to overcome anything. I run for my Aunt Patricia, who saved my life, and I run for my mother, wherever she is, hoping that someday she'll understand that love doesn't have to look like what you expect it to look like." Sarah realized in that moment that Marcus hadn't just been talking about Patricia's love for him. He had been talking about his love for her, the mother who had abandoned him. Despite everything, he still loved her. The next morning, as Marcus prepared for his race, Sarah made a decision that had been 18 years in the making. She got in her car and drove to the community center where she had been volunteering. She sat in her car for 20 minutes, then walked inside and asked to use their phone. She called Patricia again. "I want to do more than watch," Sarah said without preamble. "I want to be there. Not just for the race, but for whatever comes after. I want to be his mother again, if he'll let me." Patricia was quiet for a moment. "Sarah, he's about to run the most important race of his life. This isn't the time for grand gestures or dramatic reunions." "I know," Sarah said. "I'm not asking to see him today. I'm asking you to tell him that when he's ready, when the time is right, I'll be here. Really here. Not hiding, not making excuses, not running away." Patricia promised to pass along the message, but she also made Sarah a promise in return. "If you hurt him again, if you disappear again, if you make him feel abandoned again, I will make sure you never get another chance. This boy has been through enough." "I understand," Sarah said, "and I promise." The race itself was everything Marcus had dreamed it would be. He didn't just win gold, he broke the world record, running the 400 meters in a time that experts said wouldn't be broken for another decade. As he crossed the finish line, arms raised in victory, the camera caught something that would become one of the most replayed moments in Olympic history. Marcus looked directly into the camera and mouthed 3 words, "I love you." Later, reporters would ask who the message was for. Marcus would smile and say, for everyone who needs to hear it. But Patricia knew, and Sarah knew, and Marcus knew that those words were meant for a woman sitting in a small town in Iowa, finally ready to love her son the way he had always deserved to be loved. The real work was just beginning. 3 months after Rio, on a crisp autumn day in Chicago, Sarah Johnson walked nervously through Patricia's neighborhood, looking for the address she had memorized, but never visited. She carried a small gift, Marcus's first pair of running shoes, the ones he had worn when he was 5 years old, the ones she had saved all these years without really understanding why. Patricia answered the door as if she had been expecting her, which in a way she had been for 18 years. "He's not here," Patricia said gently. "He's at practice, but he knows you're coming." Sarah nodded, stepping into the home where her son had been raised, where he had learned to love himself despite her rejection, where he had become the man who could look into a camera after winning Olympic gold and still find space in his heart for forgiveness. The living room was filled with photos, Marcus at every age, every achievement, every milestone she had missed. But there was something else, a small frame on the mantel containing a picture of Sarah holding baby Marcus in the hospital, both of them looking peaceful and happy. "I kept that one," Patricia said, noticing Sarah's gaze. "He used to ask about it sometimes when he was little. I told him it was proof that you loved him once, even if you forgot how to show it." When Marcus came home from practice 2 hours later, he found his mother and his aunt sitting at the kitchen table, talking quietly over coffee. Sarah looked older, smaller somehow, but her eyes were clearer than Patricia had ever seen them. Marcus stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at the woman who had given him life and then spent 18 years pretending he didn't exist. She looked back at him, this tall, powerful, accomplished man who still had her eyes and her stubborn chin. "Hi, Mom," Marcus said simply. And Sarah, who had spent 18 years running from those words, finally had the courage to respond. "Hi, son. I'm sorry it took me so long to come home." Their relationship didn't magically heal overnight. There were months of difficult conversations, therapy sessions together and apart, moments of frustration and breakthrough. Sarah had to learn how to be a mother to a grown man, and Marcus had to learn how to trust the woman who had broken his heart before he was old enough to understand what heartbreak meant. But love, real love, is patient and persistent and stronger than shame. Over time, Sarah became not just Marcus's biological mother, but his friend, his supporter, his biggest fan. She attended his races, cheered from the stands, and learned to feel pride instead of shame when people pointed out their connection. David, who had grown into a better man through the process of supporting Sarah's journey back to her son, became an unexpected father figure to Marcus. He would often joke that it took him 13 years to realize that love multiplies rather than divides, that opening your heart to one more person doesn't leave less room for everyone else. At Marcus's wedding 3 years later, Sarah gave a speech that brought the entire reception to tears. She talked about the power of second chances, about the difference between the love we think we deserve and the love we actually need, about how sometimes the greatest gift we can give someone is the opportunity to forgive us. "My son taught me that being a mother isn't about being perfect," Sarah said, looking at Marcus and his new wife. "It's about being present. It's about showing up, even when you're scared, even when you're late, even when you think you've lost the right to be there." Marcus gave me the gift of learning how to love without conditions, and I hope I can spend the rest of my life earning that gift. Today, Marcus Johnson Williams is retired from competitive running, but he hasn't stopped moving. His foundation has helped hundreds of young athletes overcome adversity and pursue their dreams. He speaks regularly about the power of forgiveness, not just for the people who hurt us, but for ourselves. And Sarah? Sarah has become an advocate for racial reconciliation and adoption support. She shares her story not because she's proud of the choices she made, but because she believes in the power of transformation. She believes that it's never too late to choose love over fear, courage over comfort, connection over separation. The question that started this story, how does a mother go from being ashamed of her son to witnessing his greatness, has a simple answer that took 18 years to discover. Love was always there, buried under layers of fear and shame and social conditioning. It just took extraordinary courage from an extraordinary young man to dig it up and make it visible again. Sometimes the most powerful victories happen not on the track, but in the quiet moments when we choose to be brave enough to love the people we thought we had lost forever. Sometimes coming home means admitting that we never should have left in the first place. And sometimes If we're very lucky, the people we failed to love when they needed it most will still be there when we finally find the courage to try again. Marcus still runs, just for the joy of it now, and sometimes on the weekends, Sarah runs with him, not fast, not far, but together. They don't talk much during these runs. They don't need to. Some conversations happen in the rhythm of footfalls on pavement, in the shared breath of effort, in the simple act of moving forward together, one step at a time. Would you want to know the truth if it would shatter your whole world? Marcus and Sarah learned that sometimes the truth doesn't shatter your world, it rebuilds it into something stronger, more beautiful, and infinitely more real than the illusion you were living before. Sometimes the hardest truths are the ones that set us free.